So I want to take you for a moment back to June 5th, 1944, to the headquarters of the Allied High Command. This was the original date for D-Day, the invasion of Europe. The mission was to liberate Europe from the Nazis. Eisenhower gathered with his generals, and he heard the weather report, which was not favorable. There would be high surf and storms. And so he made the difficult decision to postpone D-Day by one day. And you have to remember that for months they had been planning this, hiding this from the Germans, who thought they were going to land somewhere else. Every day that they delayed was a chance that the Germans would find out the true plan. Around midnight, or a little after, on June 6th, the fleet began to move toward France, toward Normandy. And even then, Eisenhower almost called them back. There was great uncertainty. By the time the U.S. and the British and Canadian forces landed, some were blown off course, some capsized. The paratroopers were scattered behind enemy lines. And by the end of the day, not all the objectives were met. And the Allies were in danger. They had their backs to the sea. They were in danger of being overwhelmed by a strong German counterattack. Now, today, we know, thankfully, that didn't happen. But for them, the outcome was uncertain. And there was fear among those young men. At the early service, I was able to say that every one of those men were younger than the people here, because we were all a little bit older at that early service. But today there are some here now in our congregation that are a little younger. But they were all in their late teens and 20s. And they were afraid. Some were resigned, but all had great courage in the face of this uncertainty. You see, we proclaim, Alleluia, Christ is risen. And we sing and joyfully celebrate. But the meaning of that event is not confined to something that happened 2,000 years ago. If it was only about that event, if it meant nothing to our lives now, then it is empty. But it does mean something to our lives now. To believe in the resurrection is to see the resurrection now. To see it in the fearlessness of those young men in the face of uncertainty. And I don't mean fearlessness like they were without fear. As I said, they were afraid. But they had courage in the face of that uncertainty. To believe in the resurrection is to be able to act in the face of fear like that. It is to have hope in the face of fear like that. It's to resist the temptation to turn away, to turn inward, and to retreat in the face of fear. It is, in fact, to love in the face of fear. For those young soldiers, I know they would likely say we just did our duty. But what they did was an act of love. An act of love for this country and what it stands for. The rule of law, government by the people, rights. They did what they did for the sake of others. Really, for the sake of all of us. That is resurrection. James Cone was one of my professors. He has died, but he was a black man who wrote of the black church in the 1950s and 60s when he grew up. He wrote of the way the church in his community was a place of resistance to the powers of death. He wrote of how all week his fellow congregants would feel burdened by Jim Crow and racism. But on Sunday, the Spirit would descend, and they would taste for that moment what freedom was. But before he could write those things, he says he had a crisis of faith. He was angry at the racism he suffered. He was angry at how he and his brothers and his mother would sit up when it began to get dark and watch with worry and anxiety for their father, who was supposed to come home from work. They knew about lynching and about arbitrary arrests and about violence in the middle of the night. James Cone said his mother would reassure him, but he and his brother would only feel relief when they could see the headlights of that truck, his truck, on the street, and as it turned into his driveway. He was angry, and he wondered, how could God, if God existed, be a good God and allow so much suffering? Have you ever wondered that? But one day, he was a young adult and sat down in the church of his childhood. And he had an experience and realized that God was not absent. God was not aloof. God was not ignoring suffering, but what was right there beside him, with him, in his neighborhood. God was among them, working and suffering alongside of them to give them true freedom. One day there would be freedom, and that gave him hope. James Cone went on to become a very famous professor and spiritual leader. To see the resurrection is to not simply believe that our souls will rise up to heaven when we die. It's to see the power and presence of God here and now, even in the face of what appears to be hopeless circumstances. It's to see God in our communities, in the joy of our gatherings and in our songs. To see God in the love we share for one another. And to see God in the faces of those who stand up to brutality and cruelty. I'm going to tell you one last story to illustrate what I mean by seeing the resurrection. I have a friend. Her name is Sarah. And she's a family doctor. And she told me the story of a patient of hers. That patient had knee replacement. The surgery was pretty uneventful. But soon after, she began to feel bad, the patient. She had fatigue and aches and pains and a rash that came and went. She went back to the orthopedic surgeon and to other specialists, and they said there was nothing wrong. They could find nothing. Blood tests and MRIs found nothing. They were looking for an infection or scar tissue or something, and they could not find anything. Finally, she was in the hospital, and a neurologist came and told her maybe it was just anxiety or depression. During all this time, this patient, she went back again and again to my friend, Sarah. And my friend would sit and listen. My friend would suggest something and try something, wondering if it might help. But there was uncertainty. Nothing but uncertainty. And about a year into this, the patient was beginning to contemplate suicide. She was willing to have her leg amputated. She was desperate. And finally, after many visits, after sitting and listening, after talking, after coming again and again, the patient did a little Googling. Most people think doctors don't like Googling. I don't mind it so much sometimes. And the patient brought in this article about the possibility of an allergy to nickel, because you see, sometimes nickel is used in knee hardware. She had a hard time convincing anyone of this. Sarah had to help her. The orthopedic surgeon didn't really want to entertain it because he said it was very rare. And so they found a lab in Chicago that would do the test. And the patient had to pay out of pocket. She paid about $600 to have this test run. And when the envelope came, she was afraid to open it. What would she do if it was negative? She opened it, and it was positive. She did have a nickel allergy. And my friend Sarah, she had to kind of pull some strings to get another orthopedic surgeon to operate. She said to her friend, if we don't do something, I'm afraid we're going to lose her. And she didn't mean to the nickel allergy. And so the patient, when she went to the orthopedic surgeon, she was so grateful and so desperate. She said, you know what, if you have to, just cut my leg off. But 1 year later, she's better. Now, you've heard of DNR, right? Do not resuscitate. Maybe some of you have heard of DNI, do not intubate. Well, she says now that she's a DNO. That means do not operate. She says maybe her other knee needs it, but she said, I'll never have another operation. To see the resurrection, to be the resurrection, is to be a companion, to accompany others in these states of uncertainty and unknowing, to be open to others, to have generous heart for those who are sick and vulnerable, to be in solidarity. It's not really as much a doing in those cases. It's really a patience born of love, a patience born of hope, a patience that is born of humility. This is what the resurrection is: a refusal to turn away, to abandon, to give up. This, I think, is what the women at the tomb today teach us. They teach us fearlessness, not unlike those young men on Normandy. For they go by themselves at night, and going by themselves then as now is not always safe for women. They teach us patience, for they have been following Jesus, accompanying Jesus during his ministry, not unlike my friend Sarah, who accompanied her patient. They teach us faithfulness. They're going to fulfill the law to prepare the body before its final burial. They teach us that even when they are defeated and when hope seems distant, they do not give up and retreat. Not unlike James Cone, who in the midst of his anger and suffering was able to see God in his own neighborhood. It was an uncertain time. It is an uncertain time. And maybe those women knew something, had an intuition. But I suspect probably they were just being strong and fearless as women are. They didn't know what the future held, and they were surprised. And they were the first to hear the good news of the resurrection. They were the first to preach the resurrection. And they were the first to witness the resurrection. So let's not let them down. Let's not dismiss their tale as foolish or nonsense, as the apostles did. Let us follow them and be fearless in uncertainty by facing our fears and acting with courage, with open hearts of generosity and love. Let us be patient in uncertainty and show love even when we are provoked and angered. Let us be open to one another, willing to accompany each other in our suffering, even when it seems that hope is lost. For it is not lost. It is never lost. God is working, even here, even now. Amen.